The night was heavy with the scent of burning herbs and the distant hum of cicadas. The village square, usually alive with laughter and chatter, was eerily silent. Adia stood at the center, her bare feet sinking into the cool earth. Her son, Kofi, clung to her waist, his small fingers digging into her tattered robe. The elders, draped in white cloth and adorned with beads, stood around the stone altar, their faces unreadable. Adia's heart pounded as they approached, their hands reaching for Kofi. She screamed, her voice raw and desperate, but the villagers held her back. Kofi's wide, innocent eyes met hers as they carried him to the altar. The blade glinted in the moonlight, and Adia's world shattered. The villagers chanted, their voices rising to the heavens, but Adia heard nothing but her own sobs. When it was over, the drought remained, and so did her pain. Adia wandered the forest for days, her mind a storm of grief and rage. The trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches like skeletal fingers. She stumbled upon a clearing where an ancient baobab tree stood, its roots sprawling like serpents. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the ground as tears streamed down her face. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why did they take him?" The wind howled, and the shadows around her seemed to come alive. A voice, deep and ancient, echoed in her mind. "You seek power, but it comes at a price. Will you pay it?" Adia's hands trembled as she clenched the soil. "Take everything," she said, her voice steady. The ground beneath her trembled, and she felt a surge of energy course through her veins. When she rose, her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and the forest seemed to bow to her. Adia stood on the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Below, the savannah stretched endlessly, the golden grass swaying in the breeze. The voice had told her what to do. Let the pain consume you. Become the storm. She closed her eyes and let the memories of Kofi's sacrifice flood her mind. The pain was unbearable, but she embraced it. Suddenly her body began to change. Her arms stretched and darkened, feathers sprouting from her skin. Her feet twisted into sharp talons, and her face elongated into a beak. Black smoke swirled around her as she grew larger and larger, until she was no longer a woman but a gigantic bird, her wings blotting out the setting sun. She let out a piercing cry, a sound that echoed across the savannah. The transformation was complete. She was no longer Adia. She was vengeance. The village was quiet, the sun dipping below the horizon. Children played near the edges of the huts, their laughter ringing through the air. Adia circled high above, her sharp eyes scanning the ground. She spotted a boy, no older than Kofi had been, chasing a goat. Her heart ached, but the darkness within her pushed the feeling aside. She dove, her wings slicing through the air. The boy looked up just as her talons closed around him. His scream was cut short as she lifted him into the sky. The villagers ran out, shouting and waving their arms, but it was too late. Adia disappeared into the clouds, the boy clutched tightly in her grasp. She felt no joy, only a grim satisfaction. The first of many. The village was in an uproar. Mothers held their children close, their eyes darting to the sky. Men gathered with spears and bows, their faces pale with fear. The elders whispered prayers, their voices trembling. "It is her," one of them said. "Adia has returned." The villagers had heard the stories of the giant bird that stole children, but they had not believed them until now. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to move. In the distance, the silhouette of the bird circled, a dark omen against the setting sun. The villagers knew they were not safe. Adia was watching, waiting, and she would not stop until they had paid for what they had done. The villagers had begun to hide, seeking refuge in caves and deep forests. But Adia was relentless. She could smell their fear, hear their whispered prayers. One night she found a group hiding in a cave. They had built a small fire, its light flickering on their terrified faces. Adia landed outside, her massive body blocking the entrance. The villagers huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. She reached in with her talons, grabbing a girl who had been hiding behind her mother. The woman screamed, clutching at her child, but Adia was too strong. She took the girl and flew into the night, leaving the villagers to mourn another loss. The hunt was far from over. One of the elders, a man named Kwame, could no longer bear the guilt. He had been among those who had chosen Kofi for the sacrifice. One night he knelt in his hut, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me," he whispered. But forgiveness was not what awaited him. The door creaked open and Adia stepped inside. She was in her human form, but her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Kwame looked up, his breath catching in his throat. "You took my child," she said, her voice cold. "Now you will know my pain." She reached out, and Kwame screamed as the darkness consumed him. When the villagers found his body the next morning, his face was frozen in terror. The villagers knew they could not continue to live in fear. They gathered around a fire, their faces grim. A young man named Ibo stood, holding a spear. "We must kill the bird," he said. "It is the only way to end this." The others nodded, their eyes filled with determination. They began to plan, setting traps and sharpening their weapons. But Adia was no ordinary beast. She was a mother, driven by grief and rage, and she was always watching. The night of the confrontation was stormy, the sky lit by flashes of lightning. Adia circled above, her eyes glowing with fury. The villagers stood below, their spears raised, their hearts pounding. She dove, her talons outstretched, but they were ready. They threw their spears and one struck her wing. She let out a piercing cry, but she did not fall. Instead, she turned on them, her rage burning brighter than ever. The battle was fierce, but in the end, Adia was too powerful. She took another child and disappeared into the storm. Adia perched on a cliff, the child clutched in her talons. She looked out over the village, her heart heavy. She had taken so many children, but it had not eased her pain. She thought of Kofi, his laughter, his smile. Tears streamed down her feathered face. She was a monster, but she had not asked for this. The villagers had made her what she was. And now there was no going back. The village was in ruins. The huts were burned, the fields barren. The few remaining villagers sat in silence, their faces hollow with grief. They had lost everything. Their children, their homes, their hope. They knew Adia would return, and there was nothing they could do to stop her. They had brought this upon themselves, and now they would pay the price. Adia flew over a new village, her eyes glowing with determination. Below, children played, their laughter echoing in the air. She felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. The world was cruel, and she had learned to be crueler. She circled above, waiting for the right moment. The cycle would continue, and she would not stop until every village knew her pain. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of our actions and the destructive nature of unchecked vengeance. Adia's transformation from a grieving mother to a vengeful force of nature highlights how pain, when left unhealed, can consume us and lead to cycles of suffering. The villagers' decision to sacrifice an innocent child for their own survival set off a chain of events that brought ruin to their community. It teaches us that violence and injustice, even when done out of desperation, often breed more violence and despair. The story urges us to seek healing and forgiveness, even in the face of unimaginable loss, to break the cycle of pain and prevent further harm to ourselves and others. At its core, The Widow's Wings is a cautionary tale about the dangers of dehumanizing others for personal gain. The villagers saw Kofi not as a child but as a means to an end, and Adia, in her grief, saw the children she took as symbols of her pain rather than individuals with their own lives and futures. It challenges us to consider the weight of our choices and the humanity of those around us. True strength lies not in revenge, but in compassion and the courage to rebuild after tragedy. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping tales. Let us know your thoughts. What would you have done in Adia's place? How can we break cycles of pain in our own lives? Your feedback helps us create more stories that resonate with you. Share this with someone who loves suspenseful and thought-provoking tales, and join us on this journey of storytelling. Thank you for watching.